I'm honored to be with you today, and I just want to say a special word of thanks to Kent. I have enjoyed very much working with him for a brief while, at least, in the state of Florida. And I hope that today is my introduction to you and your introduction to me, and that we'll be able to work together as the future grows for the United Church of Christ. I want to say that I am the most optimistic person that I have encountered in denominational work about the future of the church. My partner in the Center for Progressive Renewal does new church development and planting, and so she's committed to what is the future, what's going to happen with the future of the Church of Jesus Christ and with the future of the United Church of Christ. I haven't given up on you yet, so I really am committed to trying to keep the churches that we have alive and thriving, and I hope that we'll be able to do a bit of that. So today I want to talk just very quickly and very briefly. You don't think Southerners can speak fast, but I can. About some of the principles that I have learned in keeping our churches vibrant and vital and alive, I think, well into the 21st century. And then we can unpack later dates through various means the principles that I'm just going to actually sort of briefly cover today. I entitled my address Champagne Renewal, and maybe that will make sense or maybe not when I am through. As Ken said in his wonderful introduction, I've been doing this a long time. Actually, since my bio was written, I have been doing this 40 years. I actually put this up here to prove that I was licensed to preach in the United Methodist Church in 1973. I was only 4 at the time, but they were desperate for preachers. No, actually, I really was only 18 at the time, but they were desperate for preachers, and so they licensed me to preach, and I began in a circuit of 3 small, very rural and elderly United Methodist churches in South Georgia. The bishop, in all of the confidence in the world in me, said, "Go to these churches, even you can't kill them." And sure enough, I didn't. And as a matter of fact, to everyone's surprise, not least of all me, they began to flourish again. And so over the next 40 years, I pastored a variety of churches from that rural circuit to the only liberal mega church in the South. That whole range of churches. And each time, the church flourished and grew. I just assumed that was the way it was. You know, I was so busy doing it that I didn't know there was anything anomalous about it. It just is what happened. And then after being at the Cathedral of Hope for 22 years, the United Church of Christ came and asked us if we would do this work through the Center for Progressive Renewal. They actually asked if we would start a fairly independent nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit, outside of the system of the denomination, so that we could be as entrepreneurial and creative as possible. And so that's what we did. And when they asked me to do this, I thought, oh gosh, now I have to figure out what I've been doing all these years that I thought was working. So I started in 1973 in the United Methodist Church, and thought I really wanted nothing more than to be a United Methodist minister. But while I was in seminary, I began to come out to myself, and I was a member of the South Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church, and they were very clear this was not going to work for them. And so they asked me very politely to leave, and I did in 1980. I have, of course, have been gay my whole life, but I really hadn't dealt with it, and it was just a theory until 1980. But what happened in 1980 was that I met my still partner, Bill, and so what was a theory suddenly became a reality, and the Methodist Church doesn't deal with reality, and so out I went. So I sort of started my career over, working mostly with LGBT people for the next 20 years. And in each case, I served the church in Atlanta, I served the church in Jacksonville, Florida, and eventually in Dallas. And in each case, what I found was what we call at the Center for Progressive Renewal Quad 4 churches. That is, churches that are beyond the line of viability and below the line of sustainability. I have never gone to a church that wasn't a Quad 4 church. My desire in life, Bill and I have two desires in life before we retire. One is to live in a blue state. The other is to live in a church where we don't have to raise money to fix it up. But we have always served Quad 4 churches. But I discovered that Quad 4 churches can live again. So even if your church is in the fourth quadrant of this, the below the line of sustainability and beyond the line of vitality, and let me just say that in New England, what we've discovered is, no offense, that many churches are in this fourth quadrant, but don't know it because they have endowments that mask it. So what I am saying, and I say this about the church I serve now, if your church cannot survive without your endowment or without renting your property to other people, you have slipped below the line of sustainability into quadrant 4. Now, the bad news is that 80%, more than 80%, of the United Church of Christ is in quadrant 4. That does not bode well for our future. But I want to go back to my previous statement, which is that quad 4 churches can live again. Let me say, though, what you're not going to do is go back up this hill. You're not going to go back to the way church was at your heyday. Not in the same way, at least. What you can do, though, is come across and be born again. You know, I'm not good at resurrection. Actually, only one person that I know of was, and I'm not he. Though some people think I mistake myself for him. So resurrection is not my thing. But the Bible says you must be born again and again and again. And that's not just true about you and I as Christians. It is true about our churches. They must be born again and again and again. And so I want to invite you, if your church is a quad 4 church, or if it's not actually, to begin to think about what it means for your church to be born again. Even once the Cathedral of Hope was one of the largest churches in America, the third largest United Church of Christ, having 2,200 in attendance on Sunday, even then we had to continually ask how we kept from sliding down this hill and continuously reinvented ourselves. All churches ought to do that. It is a biblical commission. You must be born again, and you can be. I went in 1987 to what was then the Metropolitan Community Church of Dallas. It became the Cathedral of Hope. This was the building that I first pastored in. It was literally a dying church. I went in 1987, and they had about 180 in attendance. And I went in November on All Saints Sunday of 1987. In January of 1988, I did 18 funerals, 10% of the congregation. In one day, I did 4 funerals. Every single person that I buried that day was under the age of 30. Before I concluded my ministry 22 years later, we had buried 1,500 people who died of HIV/AIDS. Don't whine to me. I'm not tolerant of it. I know it's difficult. I know that it's difficult to get people to come back to church. I know that you work in a secular culture where people think the church is the enemy. I know that because I did it as well. I worked with a community that not only thought the church was the enemy, but the church was the enemy. I mean, in Texas, for the LGBT community, the church was the enemy. They were out to get them. They were out to exclude them. And so this wasn't an illusion on behalf of these folks. So I had to work to convince them that there was still a place for them in the family of God, and that church still could have relevance and meaning in their lives. I know what work you are doing now, and I know how difficult it is, but I know the possibilities of it as well. So I went to this little church, and it started to grow again. Despite all the funerals, it started to grow again. We sold that building that you just saw and moved into a temporary space that we affectionately call the Pink Building, because this was painted glow-in-the-dark fluorescent pink. You could see it when you landed at the airport. And every Sunday when I stood up before church, I would have to say, we didn't paint it this color. It was this color when we got it. And so this was our temporary space. And while we were in this temporary space with 9-foot ceiling, folding chairs, we grew by 27% over the 2 years that we were in this temporary space while we built our new building. We had to build a new building because no church in Dallas would sell us their old property. One church that was perfect for us said they would burn the building down before they sold it to us. The church ultimately went out of business. The boiler caught fire and the building burned down. I'm just saying. I had nothing to do with it. So while we moved in this building, and it was amazing, the church just continued to grow and grow. I just want to say to you, the first 1,000 members are the hardest. And the first $1 million is the toughest. After that, it gets easy. I don't know what happened. It just continued to grow and grow and grow, despite the living during the season of the AIDS. So I know what it's like to look out over thousands of people's faces and pastor to them. We would rent the Meyerson Symphony Center on Easter and Christmas because they wouldn't fit in our building. The congregations wouldn't fit in our building. And we would have 4,000 people at church on those holidays. We averaged the last years I was there about 2,200 people. It was an amazing experience. And people came from all over the world. The media came from all over the world to ask this question. Why is the world's largest lesbian gay church in Dallas, Texas, of all places? And you would think after being there for 22 years, I'd have a good answer for them. But I actually have no clue why it happened there. But I think in a way they were asking the wrong question. What they should have been asking is, why was one of the world's largest liberal churches in Dallas, Texas? That was one of the amazing things. People would say, well, it's because the church is in the Bible Belt. But, there are churches in Atlanta, and Atlanta's in the Bible Belt, Houston's in the Bible Belt, Nashville's in the Bible Belt. Why in Dallas did that happen? And how did it happen? That's what I want to talk about this morning. So after 22 years at the Cathedral of Hope, I took this job with the Center for Progressive Renewal, and but the thing was, I wasn't sure that what I had done with the Cathedral of Hope, I really wasn't sure what I had done, actually, if you want to know the truth. But I wasn't sure that what I had done there still worked, and that it would work if it would work in another setting. So rather than impose on you principles that I had not yet tried and proved, I became the pastor of this church, which is the Virginia Highland. It was once the Virginia Highland Baptist Church, is the Virginia Highland Church now. And it just it must tickle God that now I'm the pastor of a Baptist church. That just is a little odd. But it is also a United Church of Christ. And so they called me there. I worked for free. Because I didn't know if it was going to work. I also had a full-time job. So I said, if you'll hire my assistant who will kind of do what I would do in my place, then I'll preach for free. So that's what I do. I fly home every Saturday night. After this, I'll fly home to Atlanta and preach at that little church. And so and it's been a wonderful experience. Now, when I got there, they were averaging 23. January and February, before I got there in March, they averaged 23 in attendance. This church is not in good shape. In fact, that window right there in the steeple has subsequently fallen out and crashed to the floor, to the sidewalk. This is what it actually looks like. You can see all the rot and how. So it was in terrible shape. So the very first thing I did when I got there was have a capital campaign to restore the building, which we are doing right now. In fact, the steeple is shrouded in scaffolding. Even as we speak, they are restoring the building of this church is in. And the great news about it is that it went from an average of 23 in attendance to 106 in exactly 2 years. We've now begun about 125. We had 217 for Easter, and we're on track to average about 150 by the time we get to this year's Easter. Wow. 2 years. And I'll tell you what, I'm never there. So the prescription for growing your church, maybe put your pastor on the road. If she shows up or he shows up on Sunday to preach, that's enough. At least that's what's happened here. At the Cathedral of Hope, when I got there in 1987, there were 180 people in attendance. These are attendance figures. And when I left in November of 2009, as the pastor, I became the dean. We were averaging 2,218. So the question is, how did this happen? One of the things that I'm advocating for is not that you go home and rip out the pews and take out the stained glass windows and start over. In fact, I don't think that's the process by which the United Church of Christ will be renewed. I think the United Church of Christ is a beautiful flower garden. I think our stained glass is wonderful, and the great pews and the wonderful people. We are a great flower garden in the world, providing beauty and calmness and values. The problem is what the world is hungering for are vegetables. So we have this great thing, but it isn't matching the great hunger, spiritual hunger in the world. What I am advocating for across the denomination is not that we rip out the flower beds, but that we plant some vegetables in the flower bed. That is, not that we stop doing what we're doing now. I think we have to be hospice chaplains for the forms of the church that are passing away, and we have to be new church midwives to give birth to what is coming. We have to do both of those things well, and we have to do both of those things simultaneously. So how do we do that? Let me run through a few of the things that I think we did that worked. I've had to figure this out. First, I think we mastered the art of reinvention. I was at a conference one time and someone said, I can tell you why the Cathedral of Hope has grown like it has. And it was like, oh my God, please do, because I have no clue. And this person who was my predecessor actually in Dallas, he said, it has been Mike Piazza's ability to reinvent himself and to get the church to reinvent itself at every stage. And so it didn't get to a stage and stop. They continually reinvented themselves and so continued to grow until the facility, there simply was no more room to grow. The art of reinvention. It was, of course, Ed Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. We've got to stop being crazy. We've got to stop doing the same things every Sunday and thinking suddenly young people are going to start coming back magically. Give up magical thinking. It isn't going to happen. But young people will come back, but not if we keep doing the exact same things. So you've got to reinvent yourself as leaders, as church leaders. I mean, if you were here this morning, you are a church leader. Church leaders have got to figure out a new way of leading church. Pastors have got to figure out new ways of doing church. And if you don't think it can't happen to you, your endowment may give you an illusion of invincibility. But it happens to major corporations. Try buying something at Montgomery Ward today. Or look for Kodak film in Target. If it can happen to them, it can happen to the United Church of Christ, and it can happen to your United Church of Christ. If, like them, you fail to reinvent yourself in a way that is relevant for the future, we can do it. We don't have to face this fate. But if we fail to reinvent ourselves, this is our fate. So how do we reinvent our beloved United Church of Christ? How do we get a 2020 vision? That's just 6 years and 2 months away. So what is the church going to look like? Are we going to continue down the downward decline of the United Church of Christ? Or are we going to reinvent ourselves? It is never too late to learn new skills. And I am a living testimony of this. I mean, what I'm standing here today doing, I never did before. For 40 years, I pastored churches all my life since I was a teenager, literally. I didn't know how to do this. I had to become a different person. I am standing before you as someone who has reinvented himself. I went back to a church with 23 people. I had to reinvent how I pastor this church. Now I'm on the road all the time. So when someone dies in my church, I pull out my smartphone. And that's how I do pastoral care. It's the only way to do it. But it's an amazing thing. Young people, they get a text from me, they feel completely cared for. Older people, I have to call them. And then I have to send the deacons to visit them. But what it's forced me to do is mobilize lay people to be the ministers of the church, not just to say that. And so I've had to learn to do church in a totally different way in the past 2 years. And if I can do it, you can do it too. Not only can you do it, but you have to do it. You know, we use the butterfly, it may be in one of our stained glass windows, as an ancient symbol of resurrection. But that's wrong. That's not what the butterfly does. It doesn't die. It feels like death to the caterpillar, but it doesn't die. What this actually is a parable, a symbol, a representation of reinvention. of one life form, taking time to become a different form. But it is the same life. Whatever your church gives birth to in the future, which it must do to survive, will have your DNA. But just like your children and grandchildren are not you, but share your DNA, it will be something distinctive and different, more youthful and energetic. But you can look at it with pride, just like you do your children and grandchildren, because you have reinvented church in a way that is relevant for the generations to come. The second thing we did was we learned the art of mistakes. I loved what Ken said last night about experimentation. We learned how to experiment with things. If no one will die, give it a try. That's our theme. If no one will die, give it a try. Experiment. Put a time limit on it. Say, we're going to try this for 6 months. We're going to try this during Lent. At a church I'm coaching right now in Michigan, and the pastor is absolutely convinced that, like most of Christendom, UCC ought to serve the sacrament of communion every single Sunday. And so he's in a congregational church. He said, so how do I survive this? I said, Lent. Lent is the best season to experiment with. Because it's only 40 days. It's only 6 Sundays. You can sit on a tack for 6 Sundays. And so people let you get away with it. Just say, for the season of Lent, one of our spiritual disciplines is we're going to serve communion every Sunday. And I said, so serve it for 6 weeks and then stop it. No matter what they say, stop it. And next year, come back and do it again. And then you'll see that people will begin to say, why don't we do this every Sunday? This is so meaningful. I loved it when and as they begin, and people, so just experiment with it. And people will love it or not. And if they don't love it, then don't martyr yourself for it. But try some things. Make mistakes. I love the thing about Michael Jordan said, that he missed 9,000 shots. Now, that's not what we know Michael Jordan for. But that's why he succeeded. He took so many shots he didn't make because that's the way God is. I mean, you read the Bible, it says, I love that parable about the seed and the sower. So you have God sowing the word. And do you notice what it says? God sows these seeds just recklessly. God is not a very good farmer. I'm just telling you, that's what the parable could mean. God is a rotten farmer. And maybe so, because the seeds just go everywhere on the path and in the briars and some on good soil. And they take root. But notice in that parable, 3 out of 4 of the seeds God sows fails. But God didn't die over it. In fact, Jesus told us the story to encourage us to try some things that are not going to work. If no one's going to die, give it a try. Try some experimentation with your worship or with your governance. God would say, and even if it fails, it's all right. You've learned something. That's what experiments, as Kent said last night, that's what experiments are. So try some things. As the person who played this sport that I've actually never seen said, Wayne Gretzky said, I missed every shot I didn't take. And so will you. You will miss every shot you don't take. We should require mistakes. I want to do this. If I were God, I would do this. You're a little closer. So what I would do is require every church in the United Church of Christ to put into a new pastor's contract the requirement that they make 12 mistakes a year. And one of them's got to be a doozy. So their annual report to the congregation, they list all the mistakes they made and the doozy. And they say what they learned from them, what we learned from them. What if we created this culture where we could experiment and we didn't kill one another over it? We knew we were going to miss the mark. I'll tell you, pastoring the largest gay and lesbian church in the world, there was nobody around to coach me about how to do that. So I had a leadership team that just said, we're just going to have to try some things. And we did. We tried lots of things and made lots of mistakes, failed lots of times. We planted 6 churches that are now United Church of Christ congregations. One of them was an abysmal failure. We didn't. So I planted 2, and then we had the failure. We didn't stop. We planted 2 more after that. So learn from your mistakes, make them, and just require them, I think. The third thing was we celebrate everything. In a church that is close to dying or is in decline, celebrate everything. Look for every occasion to have a celebration. Until further notice, celebrate everything. But tomorrow, After 18 years, we are having a day to celebrate him in his ministry because he is one of my heroes. Our church, as it began to grow, he realized he couldn't do it anymore. And so he stood aside in a way that was healthy and life-giving and supportive. He helped me find his own replacement. And tomorrow we're going to celebrate him. And we're going to celebrate his ministry and what he has given to that church, not just cast him aside. So in a church that was declining, the Virginia Hine Church, every time we took in new members, we made a big deal of it. And then after we took them in, we had a great reception. And so we celebrated it. A church that had been dying, suddenly new life was coming back into it. As I said, when I first got there, we started fixing the landscaping. We had no money. This church has no endowment, no money, none. And so I just asked people to bring plants. Just bring plants. We're going to plant plants. And I hope to God that they knew more about plants than I did, so that they would bring the right ones. I didn't actually care, though. Something was going to happen around that church. And so the first Saturday, I came on Sunday. The next Saturday, we planted plants. There was the look of something new and vital happening. As important as the plants actually were the fact that young people were outside this building doing something. And the people who drove by and walked by saw amazing things. We have no money, so we use yard signs for our celebrations. Yeah, and so you must have gotten to the mimosas for adults part. Or maybe it's the 50 Shades of Grey. So the two things that we do is, so we're in a neighborhood, and it's a fairly contemporary neighborhood, and so I do provocative things. And that was one of them. That was my Easter Sunday, not only sermon, but series. I preached about all of the shades of grace in which God comes to us. And right now, okay, I'll just make a confession. Right now, I'm in the middle of a Broadway series. Now, I will use the lectionary lessons tomorrow. Tomorrow, that's what I preach on, is the lectionary every single Sunday. But I use Broadway as our modern lesson. So tomorrow is our AIDS March. I walk in Atlanta. And so because it's about AIDS, we're going to use Rent as the modern lesson. And we'll use the assigned gospel lesson and the Timothy passage about itchy ears and all that. Last Sunday, okay, I used Kinky Boots. I needed a new musical. And it was Gay Pride Sunday in Atlanta. And so Cameron, actually, if you've seen the pictures on Facebook, she's actually wearing kinky boots in church under her alb. I couldn't walk in them, so I did not wear mine. But we had great fun with it. And so we stood outside the church beforehand with this big banner that says we're doing thing on kinky boots. And it looks like a playbill. And then the pastors are standing there in their albs and their kinky boots. Mine were gold lame. Hers were red hip boots. That's why she wore them in church, because she couldn't take them off. So we do really kind of provocative because it's congruent with the neighborhood that we live in. That's the important thing. It's congruent with our neighborhood and with the people we're trying to attract to this very old Baptist church. You notice that building looks like a Baptist church. We're trying to attract people to a church that looks like it was a Southern Baptist church in a neighborhood that isn't congruent with the values of Southern Baptists. So we do these kinds of things to invite folks. And notice the mimosas. Tomorrow we'll celebrate our former organist ministry with a champagne reception. With the first Sunday I got there in March, they did that with pedophores and champagne, and we do it every Sunday that we can. And we don't have coffee hour down in the basement or back in a back room. No. You have coffee hour out front on the front porch, so that everybody who walks by, drives by, jogs by, sees this crowd of people standing there with champagne and pedophores. I didn't even know what a pedophore was. I'm just not that kind of gay. But they serve pedophores there. And tomorrow we'll serve champagne and pedophores. And it is just amazing how we've begun to attract young people. This is our champagne and pedophore reception after church this Easter. We had over 200 people this church at Easter. It was the first time in decades that this church has had over 200 people. We had to put people in the balcony. I didn't even know that you could sit in the balcony. And so people are like cleaning years of dust away so they can sit down. It was just a little embarrassing. But this is what it looks like after. People standing there with glasses of champagne. And we don't use plastic cups. We use glasses of champagne. And you can get orange juice, or you can get, and we have sparkling cider for the kids to have apple cider. But it's just that kind of celebrate everything is really the point. Keep passion alive. David Rui, who is at Des Moines, I asked him how he had managed to I'm sorry about the microphone. I'm not sure what's going on with it. I asked him how he kept that very staid congregational church so alive. And he said he gave them a sense of urgency. How can you give your people a sense of urgency about what it is that we're doing? Every time we have a problem around our church, my partner Bill says, it's your fault. And he says, it's your fault. You are the one who told them there is no hell. Now you have nothing to threaten them with. But the truth of the matter is, there is a hell. And you know it as well as I do. You see lonely people and hungry people and estranged people and frightened people who are living every day in hell. When is it that the United Church of Christ is going to be as passionate about saving those people from that hell as the evangelicals are for saving people from God's divine marshmallow roast? When are we going to be that passionate? And where are we going to find that passion? I think there are a variety of places to find that passion.
Imagine there's no heaven. See if you try. And the world will live on.
So passion doesn't have to look like the evangelicals threatening people or us yelling at people. It can look like that. It can look like moving people to do the right thing, to live out their values, to connect with the values of young people, because they are on our side on most of these issues. Recover your passion. And that's one of the things that we did. We took Jesus seriously. We said, okay, we're the body of Christ. What does that mean? It means acting like Jesus. It means that Jesus said he came to serve, not to be served. And so we turned it inside out. To love like Jesus. The radical inclusion that the UCC preaches, we actually are trying to practice. I mentioned last night that I drive by Dr. King's church, grave rather. Downtown, the United Church of Christ, the first United Church of Christ downtown, the first congregation church downtown, is a totally African-American church. Another United Church of Christ, large United Church of Christ, just a little bit outside of the city or outside of the downtown area, is a totally white United Church of Christ. Where we are is sort of in between them. And so what we are determined to do is actually build a multiracial, multi-ethnic United Church of Christ. A church that is black and white, gay and straight, that is young and old, to live out the values that the United Church of Christ proclaims. I think our job is easier than the job of the church downtown or the church in the suburbs, because we are trying to live out the values that young people think the church ought to have. And we can use the material of the United Church of Christ with absolute integrity. We took Jesus seriously. Peter Drucker says, when he he's deceased now, when he used to go into nonprofits, he would ask the same questions he asked of corporations. What business are you in? ESPN, Sports Illustrated forgot what business it was in, and ESPN wiped them out. They thought they were in the business of publishing a magazine. ESPN understood it was sports entertainment. What business are you in? Is the business maintaining the building? If the number of meetings we have is any judge, maybe it is. So what business are you in, and who are your customers? If the people who are sitting in your pews are your customers, well, then when you have the funeral for the last one, you can shutter the doors. You're out of business. If they are not your customers, you will soon be out of business. We've got to ask those questions. I was in Maine for a wedding the other day, and this great, probably congregational church is now used for shops. Dying churches are inevitably and consistently in the business of satisfying their shareholders. That's what Peter Drucker says about church. If we are in the business of satisfying our shareholders rather than meeting the needs of the community, we do not have a very promising future. But if we can turn our face outward like Jesus, it's amazing, I think, what we can do. What I try to say to our people every time they join the church is that when you join this church, you take off your bib and you put on your apron. You no longer are here to be served. You are here to serve. You are no longer here as a guest. You're here as a host. You are no longer a consumer. You're a producer. You can't say the church they. You are now the church. The church we. We are the host. And so every Sunday morning I do like many ministers do and say, the people who are sitting around you are the ministers of the church. I say that not just to remind the visitors that the folks around them can answer their questions, but to remind the members that they're supposed to be friendly to the visitors. Because sometimes we forget and begin to think church is all about us when it needs to be all about them. And we love them like Jesus loved them. This is a key.
I don't know if you've seen one of these Jesus bobbleheads, but Jesus is becoming pretty popular out there in our culture and world, kind of as an icon today.
I think of Jesus, I believe in Jesus, and I think he was his teachings were very inspirational.
I'm all about Jesus. I love Jesus, and I think that his teachings and his beliefs were pure.
The problem is, they like Jesus, but they don't like the church.
Bible thumper. That's the first thing I think of. Pseudo-Christian people trying to tell you what they believe in and what you should believe in.
When I think of Christians, I think of dogmatic, closed-minded individuals.
I think of this thing that Gandhi said, I would have become a Christian, except I never met one. I haven't met very many true Christians in my life.
For the most part, I think of people who should just be taken out back and shot because they don't apply the love is everything message of Jesus.
So that is one of the lessons we must learn. It isn't that they don't like Jesus. They don't like what the church has become, or the public image. It isn't even the church that you are. It is the media image of what the church has been. So we've got to figure out a way to love them like Jesus did, to love them back into the church. The next thing we did was we took the United Church of Christ seriously. No matter who you are, where you are in life's journey, you're welcome here. We say that all the time. But you're going to have to give the way we give, which is to write a check or cash, because that's the way we do it here. Now, how many times is that message repeated? No matter who you are, where you are, you're welcome here, but you're going to do it the way we do it. Do you pay anything? I don't even know where my checkbook is, but if I'm going to give money to the church, I better find it. Or I never carry cash. Yesterday I literally landed on the ground without a dime in my pocket. And my daughter starts, so she's going to Texas for the summer for a job, and I'm saying to her, you have money? And she said, oh no, I got my credit card. It's like, actually she has my credit card, and because she's in college. And I said, no, here you have to have some cash. You don't go away don't drive across the country without cash. But she says, oh Daddy, there isn't any place that doesn't take a credit card or a debit card. And she's pretty much right, except the church. So that gets repeated in almost everything we do. No matter who you are, you're welcome here, except you're going to do it our way. You're going to sit in pews the way we sit in pews. You're going to sing the way we sing. We're not going to learn your music, you're going to learn ours. So we actually took the UCC seriously and meant what we said by it. And we lived out the kind of progressive values. We make sure every service is gender balanced. Okay, I'm a white man, so there's nothing I can do about that. But I do make sure that there are people of color visible in every service, and that women at least lead most of the service. I make sure that we believe, and we live it out. We use inclusive language. I know that rubs the fur the wrong way in lots of churches. Well, friends, turn the cat around. Because kids the age of my daughter, they are not going to sing hymns, brothers, still are we. They know better. My daughters grew up thinking they could do and be anything. They are not going to be inferiorized again by anybody, including the Church of Jesus Christ. And we need to applaud the women, young women, for that. I mean, thank God I have two daughters who won't tolerate sexist language or sexist behavior, even if it is in an ancient hymn. We need to begin to live out our values if we're going to attract young people back to church. So, people come to our church looking for us to be as liberal and progressive and inclusive as our media says we are, and then they find we are not. So the Barna Group, which is a very, very conservative group, says that only 16% of this age group have a favorable view of the church. Notice the number one thing is they think it's anti-gay, but they are not. The arc of the moral universe has bent toward justice, and they have come with it, but the church hasn't, or we have. But how would they know that? Well, I worked with the Montclair United Church of Christ back when it was like almost about to close. The building seats 900 people, and there were like 30 people coming. And so they were my first church to consult with when the United Church of Christ said, go do this. And it was like, I don't know. So I experimented with them. Today, they're averaging well over 200 people in that building. One of the things they did, though this is an almost entirely heterosexual church, is this huge gray stone building built by Wall Street barons back in the 1920s. And so on the front of the building, they hung the biggest gay pride flag I have ever seen in all my life. I was stunned. On this gray stone building is this gargantuan rainbow flag. And I thought, and I said, okay, I said, why? This is not a gay church. You don't have very many gay members. And the new pastor said, we took what you said seriously. We tried to find ways to say to the community who we really are. And that says it. That if you have children who are gay or lesbian, if you have friends who are gay or lesbian, if you are gay or lesbian, if you are congruent to the values of the church, ought to welcome gay or lesbian people. This is your church. I wouldn't advocate that you go find a gargantuan gay flag and hang it on the front of your building. But they went from 30 people to 200 in worship. What are you going to do to tell the world who you really are? So notice down this list, we are none of those things. Well, except they say it's boring. And we are too often that. So how do we figure out ways? I wish I could show you this clip, but I don't have time, actually. We're going to move on. How do we figure out ways to do it? The final thing I want to say is that I have grown all of the churches that I have grown over this past 40 years by trying to revitalize the church that is, not reinventing the church. I don't actually like contemporary worship. And so what I've done is take vintage church and brought it back to life in a variety of ways. Sisters and brothers, remember this if you remember nothing else. Enthusiasm and passion, plus liturgy and tradition, will enliven a service and attract people. I don't know about you, but my daughters, when they come to Atlanta to visit me, I'm going to take them to buy new clothes. And where do they want to go? Goodwill. Or a vintage clothing shop. It's like, girls, I know you're bankrupting me in college, but I can't afford new clothes for you. No. It isn't they don't want new clothes. They want vintage clothes. Retro is what they're looking for. They want something of quality at a good, reasonable price. And they can't find it at Forever 21. And it is a huge market out there that young people are looking for something of quality without having to sell their soul and give up their values. So revitalizing vintage church is critical. So remember this. Enthusiasm is not the enemy of intellect. Take what you do and make it alive again. I don't mean this in any way offensive, so please don't take it that way. But last night, that closing hymn that we sang, so, it was appropriate for the congregation for whom we were singing it and playing it. But if you're going to do vintage church for young people, it's got to be played at double time. It took everything I could do to stand there and not clap, not snap my fingers, because I come on, pick it up, because that's what you've got to do. You can sing those hymns, but you got to pick it up. And have you ever noticed that people like walking? So watching someone walk to a lectern or a pulpit, it is not edifying. And for young people, what it is dead air. And they grew up listening to radio and television, now on the internet, dead air. Somebody's fired. If there's dead air on the radio or television. So what they interpret subconsciously is this is not important. Because if it was important, they wouldn't be wasting my time with dead air. Now, I don't mean meetings, but I mean worship. I mean, worship needs to move. And it doesn't mean that you can't have silence and stillness. You should have silence and stillness, in fact, because there's a great need for it in our culture. But the silence and stillness should be deliberate, not accidental, not neglectful. And that's what so much of our worship is all about, doing it with passion and enthusiasm. So Cameron and I dress like this every Sunday. Actually, that's Easter. We don't generally wear chasubles, but we always wear albs and stoles. But we also have, you'll notice this is the Easter Sunday crowd, a packed house. We also have screens that I mentioned last night. So every single thing I say is just exactly like this. Every time I'm saying something, there is something on the screen to illustrate it throughout the entire service. Now, this is a very traditional building, and we do a very traditional worship service in which we serve communion every single Sunday. These are the stained glass windows of this generation. And you know, I learned that in 1992. I mean, 20 years ago, these were the stained glass windows. And we haven't gotten them installed in most of our churches yet. I'm not saying that you have to use multimedia. I am saying you've got to figure out some way to communicate. Stained glass windows were invented, you know why? When most of the culture was illiterate and they couldn't read the Bible, they could read the windows. I want to tell you something. Our culture is as biblically illiterate as they can be. So how do we find a way to say to them, what we are teaching you, what we are preaching about is still relevant? I believe this. If a church can provide 52 transformational, again, Kent's word from last night, 52 transformational experiences a year, the world will beat a path to its door. When I said that at the Chicago Theological Seminary, Alice Hunt tried to hire me as their worship professor. Because that's exactly what's got to happen. If you can craft every Sunday a worship experience, people don't need to know any more about God. We got this worship God with all your mind down pat. Let's get some worship God with the heart and soul and strength in there. So craft an experience where people have it. When was the last time you were in worship and went, but shouldn't you? Shouldn't being in the presence of the holy take your breath away? Shouldn't an experience of the divine leave you gasping? At least that's what the Bible says. And we've got to go back to creating those kinds of worship experiences. People have got Google now. I don't know if you've been to BeliefNet, but there is no way on Sunday morning you're going to tell them anything about God they can't look up. So give them something they can't get anywhere else on earth. Give them an experience of the divine, and they'll come back. Lyle Shallow was my mentor, and he says the chief role of leadership in a time of great transition is to facilitate people grieving the myth of nostalgia. The good old days weren't really all that good. He also said, if we wake up tomorrow and it's 1950, our church is ready. We are primed. We are good to go. We've got it all down. We know how to do that. But if we wake up tomorrow and it's the 21st century, we've got to figure out how to begin doing church in the 21st century. I want to close with a video that I have to begin by apologizing. It's Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. In Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, when it was put into video, there is this great scene at the end. I'll just acknowledge right up front two things. It is A, sexist, and B, violent. But I want you to notice, not let that get in the way for just a moment, and notice that what they are fighting are not humans. It's not humans fighting one another. It is humanity in all of its diversity pushing back against the forces of evil. And they know they cannot live. In this scene, they know they cannot win. But what they can do is give time for a young creature to save the world. I want to invite you to think of yourself and your church in this story.
Pull back! Pull back! Hold your ground! Hold your ground! Send them The same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West!
You know, a day may come when the United Church of Christ may die, but it is not this day. This day I challenge you to stand for all that you hold dear on this good earth, to fight the good fight. Can these bones live again? I think they can. And so, my sisters and brothers, what I would say to you is what the MC says at the end of La Cage aux Folles. Only champagne from now till the finale. Amen. Thank you.